Chapter 7. The Beach Break. With everything spiraling out of control, David realized that he needed to hit reset. He had to take a breather. It had been months of chaos with the clones, and he was starting to feel like he was living in a sitcom. His idea of an idyllic life, working less and relaxing more, was turning into a farce. But perhaps he could fix it. He needed a little time away to think. He packed a bag and flew to the Caribbean, hoping a few days of relaxation would help him regain clarity. But no sooner had he arrived than he ran into Clone 2, who was standing on the beach, wearing cowboy boots and a Stetson hat. "David, what are you doing here?" Clone 2 asked, raising his eyebrows. "I thought you were supposed to be relaxing in Bali." "I was," David said, rubbing his face in frustration. "But things have gone south. My clones are ruining everything. I need a break." "Well, you're not the only one," Clone 2 said with a grin. "Look, I didn't ask for this ranching life, but I somehow became the town hero. It's a mess, man. Everyone wants me to ride bulls now." David stared at him, speechless. "You're what?" Clone 2 shrugged. "It's all kind of absurd, but here we are. I'm making money, somehow." David nodded slowly. "Maybe that's the key. You're making money. You're creating something. You're doing something." "Exactly," Clone 2 said. "Maybe it's time we all stopped worrying about being perfect. The clones, the robots, the office. We're not going to make everything work the way we expect. But we might make it work in a way we didn't see coming." David looked out at the sunset, feeling a strange sense of calm for the first time in months. Maybe the clones weren't such a disaster after all. Chapter 8. The Clone Connection. David had called for an emergency meeting, a reunion of sorts. The sun was beginning to set over the Caribbean horizon as he sat at a beachside cafe, staring out at the ocean. He had invited his 3 clones to join him, and, to his surprise, they all arrived on time, no chaos, no missteps. Perhaps they were finally getting the hang of their new lives. Clone 1, now looking a little more confident, approached David first. His suit was a bit more relaxed this time. He traded the stiff corporate look for a more consultant vibe, his sleeves rolled up, an easy grin on his face. As he sat down, he didn't immediately start with complaints or problems. "I have to admit, David, this whole freelance consulting gig is strange, but it's actually been kind of fun," Clone 1 said, leaning back in his chair, his hands behind his head. "I'm helping companies develop new marketing strategies. It's nothing like the office life, but it's actually fulfilling. And it's a challenge. I can't believe I didn't try this sooner." David raised an eyebrow, looking impressed. "You're really thriving, huh? What about the whole quarterly forecast nightmare?" "Oh, that. Yeah, it was a bit of a disaster," Clone 1 laughed. "But honestly, I've realized that people don't expect perfection, they expect results. I've been fixing businesses' problems with just plain honesty. I don't even know half of what I'm talking about most of the time, but I've got this one client who thinks I'm some sort of genius. It's all about staying one step ahead." David chuckled. "Look at you, consulting genius. Maybe I should hire you to help me plan my next vacation." As Clone 1 smiled and settled into his chair, David felt a small sense of relief. The clone was figuring things out, and that was more than David could say for himself at the moment. Then, David turned his attention to Clone 2, who had just wandered up in a mismatched cowboy hat, cowboy boots, and a completely out-of-place Hawaiian shirt. Clone 2 looked oddly comfortable in the tropical setting, as though the entire fiasco of his ranching career had given him a new sense of confidence. "David, buddy, how's the vacation life treating you?" Clone 2 exclaimed, waving his arms in the air. His voice boomed with the enthusiasm of someone who was trying to convince himself that everything was fine, even though his last rodeo had been a disaster. David gestured to a nearby empty chair. "Take a seat, Clone 2. We need to talk." Clone 2 sat down and immediately threw a napkin over his shoulder like a cowboy tossing a lasso. "Well, I gotta tell YA. The real estate business? It's wild. I never thought I'd end up a rancher, but look at me now. I'm sailing land left and right. Turns out, the ranchers around here love me. They think I'm this big shot, even though I have no idea what I'm doing." David raised an eyebrow. I thought you accidentally bought some useless land. Well, yeah, I did. But I turned that mistake into something great. There's a whole market for quirky properties. You'd be surprised how many people love the idea of buying a haunted barn just to turn it into a wedding venue, Clone 2 said, leaning forward. I even started giving people tours. It's like a tour guide, except with a lot more humor and a lot fewer facts. People think I'm some kind of cowboy genius. They buy the land without asking too many questions. David stared at him, incredulous but impressed. Wait. You're telling me that the land you accidentally bought turned into a profitable venture? Exactly. Clone 2 replied, his eyes lighting up. And you wouldn't believe it, but I've got a whole group of investors interested in buying the land I've got left. They're treating me like the new face of rural America. It's absurd, but it works. David had to admit, there was something oddly impressive about Clone 2's ability to turn pure chaos into success. Maybe it was a fluke, but right now, it was working. Okay. So, you're telling me you're some sort of land mogul now? More like accidental land mogul, Clone 2 grinned, scratching his head. But, yeah, it's fun. David laughed, thoroughly entertained by the turn of events. Then he turned his attention to Clone 3, who had arrived in a similar state of disarray. Clone 3's hair was slightly disheveled, his restaurant apron slung over his shoulder as if it were a cape. He was clearly out of his element, but also, strangely, thriving. David gestured for him to sit, and Clone 3 did so with a sigh of relief. Okay, David, I admit it. I've been slacking a little, Clone 3 began, pushing up his glasses. I'm still obsessed with the robots. But I swear, there's potential there. People come into the restaurant just to see the dancing sushi bots, and I've been tweaking the robots to do new things. I've got one that can write haikus in real time while it serves sushi. But it's kind of a mess. David raised an eyebrow. A haiku writing robot? You've got to be kidding me. I'm serious. It's a gimmick, but it works. Clone 3 said, his enthusiasm growing. But I'll be honest, I've lost track of the food quality a bit. The robots are stealing the show, and the sushi's it's gone downhill. I need to balance the technology with good old-fashioned sushi making. I'm working on it. The robots will still dance, but the sushi's gonna taste amazing. I've got a big marketing campaign lined up. David leaned back in his chair, soaking in the absurdity of it all. So, you're telling me the sushi restaurant is surviving on dancing robots and haikus? Exactly. Clone 3 said, grinning. It's the future of food. It's a weird concept, but it's growing on people. David shook his head, laughing. You guys are a disaster. But a hilarious one. But in that moment, David realized something crucial. His clones weren't just doing their best impressions of him, they were creating their own identities. Despite the absurdity, they had found their way. They were embracing their flaws, owning their mistakes, and making things work in their own chaotic way. Maybe this whole clone thing isn't so bad after all, David said, taking a sip of his drink. I think I've been trying too hard to be perfect. And you guys, you're just being yourselves. And somehow, that's working. Clone 1 nodded. You're right, David. We've all learned something from this. It's not about getting it right all the time, it's about rolling with the punches. Chapter 9. The Clone Goodbye. The next day, as the sun rose over the Caribbean, David knew that his vacation was almost over. He had enjoyed his time with his clones, but there was one last lesson to be learned. He was leaving the beach behind, but the clones, his creations, were continuing their adventures. I think it's time for all of us to move on, David said quietly as he watched Clone 1 pack up his things, preparing to return to his consulting gig. Clone 2 had finished making arrangements to sell his real estate ventures, and Clone 3 was getting ready for his next sushi restaurant experiment in New York City. David stood up and stretched, feeling a sense of closure wash over him. You guys are doing great. I'm proud of you. Clone 1, always the professional now, adjusted his collar. I'm going to keep consulting. It's weird, but it's fulfilling. Thanks for showing me I don't have to play it safe. Clone 2, with his cowboy hat still perched on his head, slapped David on the back. "You know, I never thought I'd be living the rancher life. But I kind of love it. I think I'll keep working the land, but maybe I'll throw in some beach parties or rodeo shows. It's all about the brand, right?" Clone 3, looking a little worn out from his sushi robot antics, raised his glass. "I'm still going to focus on technology, but I've learned the importance of a solid foundation. The robots can dance, but the sushi should always come first. Maybe I'll find a way to combine the two, in a way that actually makes sense." David smiled. "You guys, you've really come a long way." As they all embraced the inevitability of their separate paths, David realized that he, too, had changed. He wasn't the same man who had ordered those cloning kits in desperation. He wasn't the man obsessed with perfection, clinging to a job and a lifestyle he hated. He had found something more valuable than control, the freedom to embrace mistakes and the courage to be imperfect. They said their goodbyes, each clone heading off on their own new journey, and David watched them leave, feeling an unexpected sense of pride. His clones were, in their own weird way, more successful than he had ever been in his real life. David sat down on the sand, watching the waves crash on the shore. He realized that, for the first time in years, he didn't need to plan his life. He was going to live it. Chapter 10, The Sunset. As the days passed and David's vacation came to a close, he found himself returning to a new sense of freedom. The clones had dispersed, carving out their own quirky paths in the world, leaving him with an almost surreal sense of accomplishment. But now, as he sat by the ocean on his final day in the Caribbean, David had more than just a relaxed sense of peace. He had a full understanding of what he had gained from this entire experience. Sometimes, you have to let go of control to realize what you're capable of, David mused to himself, gazing at the vibrant orange and pink hues of the sunset. It was the first time in years he wasn't thinking about a report, an email, or the next task on his to-do list. He wasn't even thinking about how the clones were faring. He trusted that they'd be fine, they had found their own way. David had learned that even the most unexpected paths could lead to something fulfilling. His clones weren't just his escape route. They were mirrors of his own fears, his own desire for control, and his yearning to break free. They had done that for him. And now, it was his turn. As the sun sank below the horizon, David felt no rush to chase after it. He would keep moving forward, taking things one day at a time. Maybe he would work on a new business idea. Maybe he'd travel some more. Whatever he did, he knew it would be on his terms. Because sometimes, the best thing you can do in life is to stop trying to perfect everything and just let it happen. The end.